we have Dr. Jose Moret with us. Now, there's a reason why the doctor is known in academic circles as the first intergalactic doctor. His passion for medicine, technology, and education knows no bounds, and he is determined to bring others along for the educational and inspirational ride. Born in Puerto Rico to a Dominican father and a Puerto Rican mother, Dr. Moret's entry into medicine was largely traditional. After graduating high school in Central Florida, he completed his undergraduate education at Clearwater Christian College and then attended medical school at the University of South Florida. He did his internship at Johns Hopkins University and completed a residency at Staten Island University Hospital in New York City. A fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania would soon follow. You get the picture. This guy's crushing it. Without further ado, Dr. Jose, how are you, man?
Philip, thank you, sir. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's good to talk to you, especially because as I've gotten to know you over time, just briefly, but as I've gotten to know you, I've learned things about the world, that there are people out there trying to do amazing things. So I want to start with something very particular, and that is, did you come from a family who were involved in entrepreneurship in any way or in the medical field in any way?
Yes to both. So, abuela, so I grew up in Puerto Rico, in Caguas, un barrio called El Verde, real near the baseball park, if anybody knows the area. But grandma herself, she was the youngest, I want to say 10 or 12 kids. And her parents died when she was very young. And so her family kind of raised her, but she ended up becoming a nurse. She was one of the first ones to go into medicine. So we had medical folks within the family. So she was kind of always a bit of an inspiration for me. And, growing up in Puerto Rico from a middle to lower income family, like everyone was always having side hustles, right? Everyone was always trying to do extra jobs, have extra money to help the family. So coming from that status, everyone's an entrepreneur. I mean, my story isn't unique from that perspective. Like everyone that's trying to get by, that comes from lower socioeconomic status, everyone's always trying to have extra income in some capacity. And then from my immediate family's perspective, my father was an engineer. So he was in engineering or in STEM, and he worked for Honeywell for many, many years. And then my mom, obviously she was doing a huge amount of work, and the bulk of the family work at home, and all the things that don't get paid for anyone that's a stay-at-home parent, which adds huge amounts of value, not just to a family, but to an entire community. So but she was always doing entrepreneurial things on the side as well, beyond just running the business of the home and the family. She was always starting like small little gigs here and there. She was always teaching herself something. She taught herself like import, export, and started doing things around ceramics. She taught herself interior designer and went actually to school for interior design and started a company around that, and would do floral arrangements and would do all sorts of things that she would teach. She taught like typing, she taught Spanish. So mom was always pushing and always hustling. So I get it from both those sides of family. And then from my Dominican side of my family, my dad's parents, they also were entrepreneurs. I mean, they started a small warehouse where they were selling like different types of equipment for like nails and hammers, kind of that kind of stuff. And then they started building on that. They started purchasing land and being, landowners and developing stuff, and started then getting into kind of farming and developments around that. So my whole family always came from, always hustling and always looking to kind of push the envelope. But I would say if, from a Latino community or Latinx community, that story is probably pretty common. My story is not unique in that perspective. I come from that community, and our community has always been one of resiliency and entrepreneurship. I mean, for the vast majority, most of the countries, we're all immigrants, and Hispanics are the main immigrant population now coming into the United States. And everyone is coming, whether they're coming through the regulatory means that are there, or whether they're trying to come, across. Like anyone that's sacrificing for their family to make the journey to the United States, whichever way they decide, there's levels of entrepreneurship there. They're looking to do better. They're looking to excel. They're looking to make a better life for their families. So my story is the same as every Latino out there. Everyone's always trying to do better for their community.
I love that you highlighted two things. And number one, that every Latino, Latinx person comes from a whole lineage of people not looking for handouts, looking to work hard and make something of themselves. And the stories are rarely ever told. The whole story of your family on both sides is so beautiful because there's a lot of work that goes into that. And with an example like that, how could you not be the kind of entrepreneur and academic or scholar that you are today? And you combine that by also highlighting the amount of work that goes unseen or unrecorded by the GDP of stay-at-home moms and how much they do and contribute to society by taking care of those things. You can just point to the nearest bachelor whose house is a mess because they don't have it together and they're like, well, I don't have the time. Well, somebody does that work. You come from a place where somebody did that work, so awesome that you brought that together. And, you being a part of medicine as a professional and then deciding to branch off and create a media company, this idea wasn't by accident. You were telling me before we had hit record here today that there were some things that sort of started to push you in that direction where it wasn't just going to be about staying in the field of medicine and going into AI and other curiosities. You almost felt like a responsibility to do something about what you were seeing. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. My career after I finished medicine, I started studying data analytics and machine learning, and obviously in that transition to artificial intelligence. And I started working with IBM Watson, both in the research and then eventually in the biz dev side as associate chief health officer. And that transitioned my career from just straight clinical medicine to really more tech and biotech, working with startups. And then that opened up opportunities to work with organizations like NASA and the UN World Food Program and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. But throughout every stage of my career, regardless if I was in research or middle management or at the executive level, in the C-suite, I was always an N of one. I was always the one of either one of one when it comes to minority representation or any kind of diversity within the group or organization I was in, or one of a handful. And seeing that lack of representation within STEM, the fields that are generating the most amount of wealth now and into the future, those things bring down or keep down communities, don't allow communities to elevate through generational wealth development. And it's not just ethnicity, it's not just BIPOC representation. Within STEM, there's a lack of representation across the board, whether it's neurodiversity, gender identity, gender, or people with disabilities. There's just a lack of all diversity within STEM. And the thing is that when you look at UN sustainability goals, those kind of things that we're trying to aspire as a global community, increasing wealth or elevating communities out of poverty is one of the major things. And from a physician's perspective, I like to talk about comorbidities. So comorbidities from a clinical perspective are ancillary things that happen, or things that you have predisposing you to potentially other things. So if we look at socioeconomic status or generational wealth development, there's so many other things that come along with that, whether it's when you're in a lower socioeconomic status level, whether it's lack of access to good education, lack of access to good nutrition, lack of access to good healthcare, to transportation, digital divides, the list goes on. And what the research shows is as communities or individuals go up in socioeconomic status, those things tend to go away. So that's the main driver of what we're looking to do at Ad Astra, and seeing that we can make a difference if we can inspire kids from underserved communities, regardless what that community is, to go into the fields of science and technology. Then wealth will be generated in their communities, all of their respective communities. And as wealth is elevated, the community is elevated. And as the socioeconomic status rises, those other comorbidities tend to go away. So that's our ultimate goal of what we're trying to do.
Did you ever, growing up or even in your college days, did you ever come across anyone who you could point to and say, hey, there's someone that looks just like me that's doing incredible things that I'm inspired by? Or was it hard to find that yourself?
It was super hard to find that. No, I grew up in Puerto Rico till I was 8, and then moved to Central Florida with my family. And no, there wasn't anyone that I was looking up to that looked like me, that came from my background. And that's super important for kids of all backgrounds. That whole concept, if you can't see it, you can't be it. You have to be able to see yourself, to be able to dream about yourself doing that in the future. And that's why media is so powerful. Media has always been powerful. I mean, we can go back and we have plenty of stories throughout history of amazing engineers that just having one person that represented who they were caused them to do what they did. Like Mae Jemison, the first African-American female to go into space. And she dreamed about, because of Star Trek's Uhura, she dreamed about being an engineer or going to space someday. And she eventually did that. And that is so important to have that representation within media, especially now, because we spend so much time consumed in media in all aspects, whether it's on our phones, whether it's in our cars, whether it's at work, especially since so many people are working from home, or whether it's for leisure. Media has such an overwhelming influence on our lives. And that can change perceptions. But the other aspect to it is that if we can get more diversity within the STEM roles, then it has twofold improvements. One is the fact that if we're going to be continually to be aggressive at the world stage and competitive at the world stage in these emerging technologies, where you think about robotics, additive manufacturing, quantum computing, xenobots, fission, all of those things, then we have to embrace our greatest strength. The United States' greatest strength has always been our multiculturalism, the fact that we have diversity. What we show, what the statistics and the data shows us, is that when you have diversity within any kind of project or any kind of business, that just improves innovation and improves the outcomes of that. And yet we are essentially, shackling ourselves and not allowing our companies to excel by not increasing the diversity within them. And we need to be able to be competitive, because there are other countries that are out there to beat the United States in various aspects. So if we want to remain competitive in those emerging technology fields, we have to embrace our greatest strength, which is innovation. And the fact that all of this will help the entire United States, the entire community, just elevate over time.
Yeah, I recall seeing the data that in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that in particular, in like, let's say our biggest exports in America at the time I was looking at that, according to the statistics, were saying energy and airplane parts and sort of just aerospace parts in general, manufacturing and such. The actual breakdown of the demographics, BIPOC didn't exist in those numbers. And I was like, wait a minute. So America's biggest exports have zero, close to zero. There might be someone who's probably cleaning the place, right? But close to zero in the actual biggest export of America, military, aerospace, and energy. Most of those things that we focus on as a country doesn't have any multicultural diversity. And I said, well, wow, that's kind of like, we should be looking at that and talking about that. And I'm so glad that you are, because the other side of that is that, yeah, there's hardly professors, hardly, engineers and computer scientists, rocket scientists. I mean, you're involved in so many things. Was it when you stepped in AI that you started designing models or helping work with people on models that generated data, that you started maybe doing some of your own side projects to see the data? Or did you already intuitively know we need more? I just don't see it anywhere. And that's really where you started.
Yeah, I really started from my own perspective. It was more anecdotal, seeing just everyone around me. But and again, my story in this perspective is not unique. Like anyone that's usually the first in any place, you're seeing that constantly, and the same challenges that keep different diverse communities from being the first. You face them once you're in those positions. The challenges never stop. And seeing that anecdotally, and then over time, educating myself on the data and seeing like the fact that our STEM overall STEM workforce in the United States is 89% white and 72% male. I mean, it's an issue that we need to help change if we're going to change some of the systemic inequalities that have developed over time. And then one of the greatest things that also influenced me is understanding that these communities, if you don't if you're not part of the STEM workforce, which is generating so much wealth, as things increase over time and so much is going into STEM, if you have less and less, or even if it stays the same, the divide between haves and have-nots, it's only going to increase over time. And there's a lot of data out there talking about that from a government and nation perspective, but from a community perspective, the same still holds true. And if we're not going to do things that are actively trying to overcome those divides that we have amongst communities, then the problems that we currently have are only going to increase, or only going to perpetuate. So that's
Wow.
it's more important now to be doing these things, because these things take time. They take time. We need to be inspiring kids now, when they're 4, 5, 6, to make sure that they get into middle school and they're competitive and they're going into these things. But a lot of data shows us that even if you get them there, a lot of kids, whether LGBTQ+, BIPOC, young girls, they tend to drop off in middle school and high school for a lot of different reasons. And then when you get into college, again, you see this precipitous drop off, and it keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And so these are the types of things that this isn't just a one and done. We have to be building content that has diversity in it within science at all levels, starting from very young all the way to their career.
And I think that's essentially why you started launching Ad Astra and having it create content. Like, its main focus is creating content to keep that thread, that storyline, that narrative inside kids' heads as they grow older. And if I remember correctly, you had talked about, like, you're creating content that can grow up with them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started with generating content where the data shows as the kids start dreaming. So kids start dreaming about what they can be when they see things when they're very young, from 4 to 6 and 6 to 11. So a lot of our content tends to be tailored at those levels. We're working, we have books in Spanish and English, bilingual. We even started creating books in Dari for our new neighbors from Afghanistan that have come over. We have comics, graphic novels. We're working on animations. We're working with series that have been already on Netflix. We've been working with space racers. They also, we sent toys up in a collaboration with space racers in St. Jude's on the Inspiration 4 mission, which was really exciting, and been selling those to fund research for St. Jude's. But yeah, we're developing content specifically for those age groups. And then we have projects that are in development that are for older age groups. We're working anything from animation to 2D and 3D animation to live action to documentaries. But yeah, everything we're doing, because we want to create content across the spectrum for all age groups so that kids can continually be seeing themselves. The thing is that oftentimes in media, especially in anything that has a role that's a scientist or a doctor, you don't typically have someone that comes from a diverse community in those roles. So if you don't have that representation, then it's hard for you to think of yourself as, oh, okay, I can do that. Oh, okay, I can be that. But the same part on the other side, the majority who tends to be gatekeepers, who tend to be in control of, who can go into these fields, they have to see that representation as well, so that when they see someone that looks different from who they are, they have that in their mind, like, oh, okay, even though you may not look or speak the same as 99% of the people here, you still deserve to be here. And so we want to make sure that our content reaches everyone, because we want to make sure that it's not just for the underserved kids to see themselves in those roles, but also the majority to be able to say, oh, okay, that makes sense as well. We see that person in this role without any kind of, unknown bias that they might harbor.
I love it, because a lot of people in Hollywood try to have that conversation about, representation matters. And sometimes people look at Hollywood, regardless of what cause they want to get behind. It's like, oh, it's actors stepping in, trying to jump on a trend or some kind of, there's always some opinion. But then you look at the real world and you look at professions in STEM and you realize the same problem exists there. And as you were talking, it occurred to me, I started thinking to myself while I was listening to what you were saying, I can scarcely think of a single one of my friends. I'm Latino, right? I can scarcely think of a single one of my friends that is actually like a scientist, you know what I mean? Or an engineer or something along those lines. And I said to myself, wow, should that be the case? Not even a mathematician that I can think of. Should that be the case? Should I not be able to call into my network and say, in fact, I know many of them turned out to be psychologists or people in mental health, because people in the hoods who grow up in the barrios and the hoods mostly have to deal with the fact that poverty is so extreme, and like what that does to people culturally with violence and this and that and all of that before they can even get to school and have a regular day where they're learning subjects. There's this whole other turmoil that they have to overcome on top
Yeah.
of everything. And I think that makes a big difference, because if we can start changing that conversation, if you're like, yo, you want to be a scientist? Yeah, me too. I was trying to, and have the, as kids, like they start hanging out like that. And then middle school comes around, right? And you were saying women in particular, that demographic was showing a drop off in middle school. What happens a lot when people's bodies start changing, right? They don't have any, not only are they not interested in STEM yet, but now they also don't have any proper education, because most people at home culturally have a hard time discussing certain things, like, you know, when your body changes, this is what happens to you, because STEM doesn't exist at all. We can't have these logical, you know, these conversations. And the same thing probably happens in high school again, when maybe it has a lot to do with that, was the bodies again are changing and transforming, and now roles in society are changing, and now you're an adult and you have the option to do this or that. And, you know, all these things play a role. And you're right, it starts from the beginning. And if we can change the type of education content that's being consumed, Lord knows social media has had an incredible impact on our children and the way that they're growing up. And if we could have Ad Astra step in and do that and change that tone and what they're consuming, I think that's going to be big. Because, you know, the shark song is cool, but is it teaching them to do more than just sing a shark song?
Yeah, it's about that representation. Yeah, and in middle school, it's multifaceted. It's not biology plays a minimal role. Probably it's really about just that representation and nurturing people from different backgrounds, because you see the same kind of drop off in BIPOC kids, regardless of gender. You see the same thing with LGBTQ plus kids, regardless of gender identity. So it's just people from underserved communities that tend to drop off, and then it gets worse as you keep going up and up. And it's just that lack of representation. One of the things that people talk about is once they break into those communities, into the STEM communities, they don't see other people like them, and they don't also feel welcomed. And you see that across the board, regardless of what particular background or subgroup we're talking about. And it's important to change that culture. It's important to change that perspective. And psychology, though, you talk about a lot of your friends are psychologists. That's a STEM field, a very important STEM field, specifically because, like you mentioned, mental health is kind of another thing that we need to be open and have those kinds of discussions. And you're right, coming from underserved, underprivileged communities, there's a huge amount of that. And then obviously there's cultural differences too, of how people are open and talking about mental health across the board. So psychologists is a great field, and I would love more of them. And we need to keep, like you talk about, the fact that it was hard for you to think of anything other than psychology. We need to inspire that in kids from underserved communities. And that's one of the things that, you know, once I started thinking about, all right, this is a problem. Like, there's not enough representation of any kind within the fields that I'm working in, and look at the wealth gap between all these different subgroups. Like, we need to change that. STEM is what's generating a lot of wealth. How do we change that? What do kids are thinking about being? What are they dreaming about being? What are they aspiring to do? And when you talk to kids, you know, for the most part, you know, who do they follow on Instagram? Well, they're following musicians or artists or athletes, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But realistically, that's not good. Most of us aren't going to make it big in the art world. Most of us are not going to make it big in sports. You know, me growing up from Puerto Rico, you want to be a baseball player, right? With Juan Gonzalez or Jose Canseco, Ivan Rodriguez, people like that. Or Roberto Clemente, if we go really, you know, farther back. But realistically, it's a lot easier to make a 10,000 nurses or 10,000 doctors than it is to make 10,000 Roberto Clementes. We're just not, it's just the law of averages. We're not going to make it in those fields. But if we make it in the STEM fields, then that really changes the entire community, because then you've transitioned to start generating very high income across the board. And that really brings a lot of power, a lot of change to communities. And that's one of the things, especially you talk about motivations, you know, around the time that Hurricane Maria and and then the earthquakes and everything was hitting Puerto Rico, you see how the communities are affected. You see how being stuck in non-STEM roles, having to have roles that can be heavily affected by things like climate change. Or look at right now during COVID-19. COVID-19 disproportionately affected BIPOC communities or lower income communities for a plethora of reasons due to systemic inequality. But one of them was the fact that when you come from lower income communities that aren't in STEM, well, you can't transition to just working from home. You can't transition to just Zoom because you have to be out there. If you're not working, you're not getting paid. If you're not, going to your job, you're not getting paid. But if you were in a STEM role, in a more of a white collar role, then you weren't affected as much. You still had your healthcare, you still had your income. You didn't have to have that disproportionate effect that these global things tend to have. Climate change tends to affect lower income more than anyone else. Global pandemics tends to affect lower income more than anyone else. So people that are already under the weight of all these other kinds of systemic inequalities then get disproportionately affected. But if we could transition all of these underserved communities to STEM roles, then it would equalize things when these types of things tend to happen.
Makes so much sense. I mean, some of them might have even been able to contribute to the research to resolving the COVID issue. If that entire BIPOC population were to be given the proper education as things move forward, we stand to have more people in that workforce able to be activated to doing something about this. And that's the clearest example that we could point to of the importance of being able to uplift and educate and inspire and encourage rock stars in these fields of STEM, like you yourself, with being a Dr. Intergalactic, like being able to, the same way Gary Vee made it cool to be an entrepreneur, we need to do the same thing for all of the STEM fields. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's cool. He's one of them. We got Bill Nye. We need more of that, more rock stars who can put that out, don't we? And that's what Ad Astra is trying to accomplish.
1000%. And that's the thing. It's not like we didn't exist, right? It's not like there's
right.
There aren't amazing women in science or amazing LGBTQ plus in science or BIPOC in science. There are, but we haven't done a good job in telling our stories. We haven't done a good job in reaching the kids and letting the kids know about us. We haven't done a good job at, like you said, creating rock stars. Yeah, there's a handful and you can name them and kind of everybody knows the same, but we need to make more and we need to inspire more, because realistically science is the engine that drives everything that we have. We are able to talk right now because of science. We have electricity because of science. There's everything that we have and everything that people enjoy, whether it's their smart device or whether it's their way of life. It's science has made all this, and science is generating so much wealth for so many communities, but the underserved and the underrepresented that aren't in those are being held back. And then the other issue, it's not just that there are stories out there, and if we don't tell our stories, who will? So we need to be out there telling our stories, because at the end of the day, it's our greatest vested interest to be telling our stories. Other communities, it's not as a great vested interest, and that's understandable. They tell their stories. But we need to be out there pounding the pavement and telling our stories and telling about where we're coming from and what we've done and what we're doing and what we're going to do in the future. And that's super important. And then the other aspect of getting representation in STEM is the fact that if you don't, then you can perpetuate systemic inequalities. And there's a lot of data behind that. Joy Balawani, Dr. Balawani from MIT did a great study. They did a Netflix documentary on it called Coded Bias, where they showed, she was actually doing research. She's from MIT and they were doing research. She was trying to do a facial recognition application. So she just got over the counter or off the shelf facial recognition software, and she was trying to create something. She's African-American, so dark skinned. And when she tried to utilize the application, it didn't recognize her face. It said there's no face there. But she found that when she put on a white face mask, it recognized her face. And I would tell people, go watch it, because I don't remember all the details of the data, but when she looked at how that artificial intelligence, how that facial recognition was actually evaluated, it was something like over 90% male and over like 90% Caucasian.
Wow.
So that's why it was misidentifying her. And that same software has been used in criminal justice. Similar types of AI applications that use biased data have been put into healthcare applications, which then say to not treat BIPOC individuals with as aggressive types of treatments compared to non-BIPOC individuals. And it's because that data was biased that was training the artificial intelligence. And the thing was that when she went deeper into the facial recognition AI and looked at who were the engineers that were creating those applications, they were all white Caucasian engineers. And it's not that they had their, they weren't biased themselves, but it's the fact that there was no one at the table that looked different from them. If there had just been one female engineer or one BIPOC engineer, potentially they probably would have stopped and said, hey, our data is like 95% white and 99% male. Perhaps we should use more diverse data to make a better application. And the thing was that once she showed that to, she went to Amazon, Facebook, IBM, like all the major players in it. A lot of them went back and fixed it. They said, oh, wow, yeah, you're right. That was, that we should have realized that that's not the kind of data we should have been using. We should have been using diverse data to create a really robust application. So, but it's the thing was, there's that old adage, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So it's the fact that there was no one at the table that was diverse that could say, hey, you think we need to stop this, think about this, slow down. And the same thing happens, throughout industries. If you don't have diversity there, then that's when you can get into trouble. And it's not that you may have, actual true bias within you, but it's just the fact that you have blind spots. We all do, because we all bring our own culture. We all bring our own past. But if we don't have the experience that someone else has, how could you ever tell their story? How could you ever build something for them? So it's really important. And we were talking earlier about the fact that within media, more diverse stories are trying to be told, but who's telling those stories? Are the creatives diverse? Are the creatives a true representation of what they are creating? And so you have the potential. It's great that more diverse stories are being told, but you have the potential of getting into the same problems of that AI application, that you're perhaps not seeing something, or perhaps you may say something that is overstepping or perhaps inappropriate. But you wouldn't have done that. You wouldn't have accidentally made that mistake if you just simply had a diverse group of people that were actually creating that to begin with.
Coming back to the original reason you've been doing what you've done all your career is specifically for that. It reminds me of, there was a child, I forget, he was recreating all the medical books, but for darker skin color, because pain looks different on different people and symptoms look different on different people. And that was a thing that wasn't accounted for, speaking directly to what you're talking about. And it was a kid who decided to do this, who was studying, and if I could be wrong, but they were definitely not in the country. They were a southern continent, somewhere near Africa, around there. And it was just insane to me that had never just occurred to anybody. To no one, it just wasn't occurred. It comes back to perpetuating the issue. It's not that there's maliciousness on the other end. It's just not a conversation being had.
That's the thing. And we all have that. We all have that without knowing it. And the thing is that it's important to be honest when those things happen, because no one's perfect.
Yeah.
And if that happens, just own it. Like, oh, this was a mistake, kind of like IBM did. Like when Dr. Bolowini showed them the data, like, oh, that was a mistake. Let's fix that. And companies are trying to fix it. They're trying to do it, especially STEM companies. But as you mentioned in media, there's something about what you say and then what you do, right? And a lot of companies are talking, but not as many are actually doing the walk, kind of thing. But then the other aspect is creating the pipeline. So even if they want to do that, we don't have the pipeline of kids going into it to be able to fix the problem, at least in the short term, which is why this is something that we have to be working on now. And it's going to take decades for us to actually overcome and fix the problem, because it's been decades, right? It's been decades of inequality for all sorts of reasons. And now we're creating a solution. No one else was doing it. So I decided let's go fix the
This is
problem.
crazy because it'll take at least 30 years for the next generation to finally catch up and be that dream that you have. What an ambition. How can people support what you're doing? You're bootstrapped, you're looking for funding. How can people support Ad Astra?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're bootstrapped. Two ways they can do. We're about to go into an equity CF raise. So follow us on social media and our website, Ad Astra. So ADASTRA Steam Media. STEAM.com is our website, and at Dr. Intergalactic to find out information from when that drops. That's going to drop here in the next couple of weeks. So anyone that wants to invest from that perspective, and then anyone that wants to purchase our content, go directly to our website. You can purchase our content. We partner with folks for large orders of our content, getting it out to either different organizations or different school districts, and then we create content for folks. So if anyone is interested in having any kind of diverse media be created for them, we have amazing writers, diverse illustrators and animators that could do that as well. So all of those are ways that people can help us succeed and be part of this journey.
I love that, man. And as we bring this to a close, Dr. Jose Moret, I would like to know, and you're welcome to pass, but I hope you indulge me, if you could have invited anybody today to join us, dead or alive, to sit back and listen to your journey, where you came from, what your plans are, where you want to move the world forward, who would it be and why?
That's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. I would say, there's a couple people that jump to mind right away. Obviously, my grandparents are a big one of who I would love to be able to say that to. But the thing is, the way I view it is I carry them with me. And that's true for all Latinx, Latino community folks, right? We carry our entire community with us. We carry them in our hearts, we carry them in our minds, we carry them in our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations. We know that we build on their shoulders, and we know that the next generation builds on ours. And every ceiling we shatter is because they pushed us up through it. It's not anything we did ourselves. So even though I would say them, they're already here. So if I would say someone, I'd probably pick me 10 years from now, because I'm always chasing that person. I'm always chasing, because I know the person I am now, 10 years ago, I'm way better than that person. And the person that I will be in 10 years, I know I will have failed so much. I know we'll have learned so much. And that's the person I'm always aspiring to be. And when I get there, it'll be whoever I will be in 10 years. That's who I would love to talk to and love to figure out.
I love that. That's the first time someone's given an answer like that. I appreciate that, man. And it speaks volumes to your commitment to growth and excellence, looking like overcoming failures. Getting back up is the important part, not when you fell down, but when you got back up. And that's really what I love about what you said. And a great reminder and note to end things on, as the ambition that you have is decades in the making, and you've started off strong. You've built up such a great platform to get there. And I want to support that in any way that I can. So I want to invite everyone to, again, go to, it's adastramedia.com or what?
Steam Media.
Steam Media.
Yeah, steammedia.com. And then at Dr. Intergalactic is
your social.
So DR and Intergalactic at Instagram. Yeah.
Right on. I'm going to be there. And thank you so much, man, again, for taking the time to chat with me. It was totally worth it. I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for the opportunity. I don't take it for granted.